In the 20th century, the illustrated book was a form of Gesamtkunstwerk and characterized many attributes of modernism. It was anti-historical, and, and that can be seen in the opposition to decorative typography. As described by Harrison, remember that modern meant that art should be of its own time and take not only the themes but also the attributes of contemporary life. Art should be about the new rather than about the past, and it should engage with one's surroundings and the events of one's time. A core value, therefore, was originality. So many of the books that we will examine in this, when we're looking at modern books, are extremely original. They are formally innovative. They rebel against the art academy and against the middle class or bourgeois taste. By the middle of the 20th century, there was a move away from illustration as derived from explicative supportive of text to illustrations that were parallel or added meaning. While the aesthetic of the Kelmscott Press was certainly diametrically opposed to what we will see in the modern period, one of the things that it did do was to elevate the illustrated book as an aesthetic object and to rethink the role of the different elements of book production. Remember that the Kelmscott Press was a reaction against the drop in design and production standards. One of the things that is obvious in that is the attention to handcraft. In Christie's description of this book, they write, printed in red and black, woodcut frontispiece, borders and initial capitals by William Morris, a few light spots in a few margins, original limp vellum, spine lettered in gilt, cloth ties, light spotting on the edges, minor soling, limited edition, one of 350 on paper from an edition of 348 copies. This was a very expensive book, but one that attended to all the state-of-the-art standards in terms of handcraft. Nonetheless, there was also a political aspect, and Morris, as a socialist, believed that the capitalist market exploited workers, and one of his founding principles for the Kelmscott Press was actually that to reunite the worker and their product, and thus to eliminate the alienation of labor at the root of Marxist theory. In his book, Bauhaus, Modernism and the Illustrated Book, what Alan Bartram identifies is not so much the Kelmscott Press, although he also goes to that, but also the aesthetic movement, and specifically Whistler, James McNeill Whistler, whose Baronet and Butterfly demonstrated freedom of type on the page, sparsity of image, spaciousness of layout, and the use of the margin which breaks the traditional layout. He writes that its wide margins contain notes, references, and sarcasm that relate to the text. They take the place of an image. Image is secondary to text. The strongest and earliest real manifestation of the Gesamtkunstwerk, this interaction of different disciplines of high and low art, can be seen in Art Nouveau and the Jugendstil that comes out of the secession in Vienna, Berlin, and Munich. In these styles, there's a harmonization of art and artifacts, a reliance on natural forms, the ideals of simplicity and integrity. There's freedom in the use of space. The blocks don't align. There are experiments with blocks of text. There's asymmetry. In fact, it seems like there's a mocking of the historicization in the arts and crafts movement. And although the Kelmscott Press and William Morris were founded on these ideals of socialism, it was only the very wealthy who could afford their luxury editions. In Art Nouveau, there is a strong association with the rise of socialism, and an appeal for much broader audiences. Alphonse Mucha's Lord's Prayer, Le Pater, in each of the 7 verses, they're reconstructed in a set of 3 pages, so there's a very even rhythm. Page 1 has a color-relevant verse in French and Latin. It has a lush floral border with a symbolic female figure. On page 2, you would find Mucha's personal interpretation decorated with floral patterns. Page 3 were monochromatic pages printed in photogravure, which contained a full-page allegorical drawing illustrating Mucha's philosophical response to the verse, in fact, then inserting the artist's interpretation in a way that is not an illustration, not supportive of the text, but really an independent artistic statement. Aubrey Beardsley's interpretations of Oscar Wilde's Salome gave rise to all kinds of theatrical and dance interpretations, and also came to equate Art Nouveau with decadence, and furthered this parody of the arts and crafts era. Collaborative venture, The Yellow Book, was a hallmark for decadence. This was a periodical in the sense that it was issued regularly, but also took the format of a book and featured essays, poems, fiction, and illustrations that was produced in collaboration from 1894 to 1897. The yellow and green, colors that were associated with bruising and decay, are also the colors used by Tanguy in his cover for the volume on Apollinaire. These large format and beautifully produced books were collected as objects, ironically like the very Kelmscott press that they parodied.